modern masculinity became a kind of exile. Men were displaced from the rhythms of nature, from intergenerational bonds, from the intimacy of craftsmanship, from embodied care. They were seduced by roles that promised power, but delivered isolation.
Welcome to the Undead Sages podcast, where we travel back in time to talk to long-dead wise men and women. Today is the third in a series of discussions about masculinity, in which we discuss what it means to be a man. My name is Merijn de Haen, and in this interview, we'll be talking to Ivan Illich. Ivan Illich was a radical social thinker, priest, and philosopher who challenged the foundations of modern institutions, schooling, medicine, transportation, and more. His work exposed how systems designed to serve often end up diminishing human agency. In a conversation on masculinity, Illich is essential. He helps us see how modern life has uprooted men from embodied presence, meaningful work, and deep community, and what it might take to return. So let's travel back in time to Germany in 2001 and meet him. Mr. Illich, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here, though I must admit, the idea of being in a podcast is a curious thing for someone of my generation. Still, I welcome any space where we can speak freely, question deeply, and perhaps unsettle what we've grown too used to. Let's begin. What would you like to explore first?
Why don't we start with a brief overview of your life?
Gladly. I was born in 1926 in Vienna, a city still haunted by the fall of empire. My heritage is mixed: Croatian, Jewish, Catholic, aristocratic. My early life was shaped by war, exile, and crossing borders. I studied in several places: Florence, Salzburg, Rome, and was ordained a Catholic priest in 1951. But institutions never quite fit me. I found my calling in Latin America, particularly in Puerto Rico, where I led a university and clashed with church authorities over their imperial attitudes. Later, in Cuernavaca, Mexico, I founded the Centro Intercultural de Documentación, or CIDOC, a place of radical learning beyond the reach of official curricula. By the 1970s, I turned more critical of industrial society itself, its schools, hospitals, transport systems. I wrote books like Deschooling Society, Medical Nemesis, and Tools for Conviviality, warning how institutions, designed to help, often end up disempowering us. I kept writing, teaching, and thinking until my death in 2002. Even while living with cancer, I refused painkillers, seeking to face death with clarity, not sedation.
Can you tell us a little more about your death?
I was diagnosed with cancer in the 1980s. I chose not to numb the pain with narcotics. I wanted to remain present, to learn from dying, not escape it. It was long, yes, and hard, but I lived fully through it. Friends came, conversations continued. I died in 2002 in Bremen, not with fanfare, but with attention. I hope it was a good death.
As the thoughtful person you were, I'm sure it was. Can you tell us more about the place you grew up?
My early years were shaped by Vienna, still carrying the faded elegance of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was a place of intellectual ferment and rigid class structures, but also of danger, particularly for a child of Jewish descent. Hitler's shadow soon fell over Europe. I fled with my family, first to Italy, then to other parts of Europe. These dislocations were painful, but they made me wary of nationalism, of identity rooted in state or race. I grew up more in exile than in a single place. That gave me a sense that true belonging comes not from borders, but from relationships and conversations.
Take us on a tour of the places that mattered most to you.
Let's start with Rome, where I was ordained. There, I saw the church both at its most beautiful and its most bureaucratic. Then there's New York City, where I first encountered American excess and its possibilities for reinvention. But Cuernavaca stands out above all. There, at CDOC, we built a space not of instruction, but of liberation. People came to unlearn their professional identities and imagine new forms of life. We rejected grades and diplomas. We read Paulo Freire, debated barefoot in courtyards, and found something sacred in uselessness. Lastly, I must mention Bremen, Germany, where I spent my final years. I was close to my friend Barbara Duden and lived quietly, reading, walking, dying slowly and attentively.
Tell us about the intellectual, philosophical, and religious currents of your place and time.
I lived through an age of rising modernity, of mass education, mass medicine, mass everything. The Cold War carved the world into false dualities. Development became a new religion. Even the church traded mystery for management. Against this, there were bright lights. The Second Vatican Council opened windows in the church. Liberation theology rose from Latin America, insisting that the gospel must take the side of the poor. Philosophers like Heidegger questioned the very foundations of technology and being. Paulo Freire spoke of education as the practice of freedom. But mostly, I saw a world drunk on progress, blind to how its institutions were devouring autonomy, community, and meaning.
Tell us about philosophers or sages that had an influence on you, or to whom you had a relationship of some sort.
I admired Gandhi deeply, not for political strategy, but for his insistence on limits and self-rule. His Swaraj became a guiding idea for me. I also read Heidegger, who sharpened my sense of how modernity uproots our way of being. Then there's Paulo Freire. We were friends. He helped me see how education, when forced, becomes oppression. And Jacques Ellul, a French thinker, taught me to see technology not as neutral, but as shaping society in ways we barely notice. I always return to the Gospels, though, especially the idea that the kingdom of God is among us, not in institutions or utopias.
Did you get involved in any controversies?
Many. I left the former priesthood in the 1960s because I refused to be a tool of cultural imperialism. The Vatican wasn't pleased. In Latin America, some saw me as a traitor to progress. In the United States, critics of deschooling society thought I was anti-education. I wasn't. I just believe compulsory schooling destroys learning. I didn't mind controversy. It meant people were paying attention. I tried to provoke thought, not win arguments. I sought clarity and sometimes the courage to walk away from broken systems.
Can you tell us about your teachings or life lessons?
I taught that institutions, once they outgrow a certain size or logic, tend to invert their purpose. Schools prevent learning. Hospitals make us sick. Cars isolate us. These were not attacks, but invitations to rethink. I believed in conviviality, tools and systems that enable people to live well together. I tried to awaken a sensitivity to scale, to limits, and to local wisdom. Autonomy, not efficiency. Friendship, not professionalism. I hope to remind people they can shape their world without experts controlling every decision.
How did your teachings stand out from what was already taught in your lifetime?
I didn't offer reforms. I called for renunciation of progress myths, of compulsory education, of institutional dependency. Where others wanted better schools, I asked if schooling itself was the problem. Where others trusted doctors to heal, I warned of medicalization stealing our power to suffer meaningfully. I asked uncomfortable questions. That's why I stood out. I wasn't selling solutions. I was trying to free imaginations.
How can your teachings be relevant for people who worry about the uncertainties of life?
I would say, learn to live with uncertainty, not fear it. The promise of control through science, schooling, insurance is a dangerous illusion. Sensitive souls should reclaim their inner compass, embrace limits, not as defeat, but as liberation. We don't need institutions to tell us how to die, how to learn, how to heal. Life is uncertain, yes, but also filled with mystery, intimacy, and grace if we dare to dwell in it without guarantees. Know this: freedom is not found in access to services. It comes from the ability to shape your life with others, using tools you understand, within limits you accept. We must reclaim our capacity to live, suffer, learn, and die without surrendering these to professionals. Modernity flatters us, but often robs us of soul. I urge everyone to become more conscious of how systems shape them and to step outside when necessary.
You questioned industry, modernity, and technology. Can you go into what you thought was bad about them, what a better life might look like, and how we can live a good life while engaging with technology?
Yes, this is the core of much of what I wrestled with. Industry, modernity, and technology are not evil in themselves, but they carry a logic, a momentum that often escapes our control. What begins as a tool to serve us quickly becomes a system that shapes us. We adopt a machine, and soon we are made to live at its pace, on its terms. This is what I call the radical monopoly. Not when one company dominates, but when one mode of doing something becomes the only socially acceptable way. Take the car, for example. At first, it's a convenience, but then roads are widened, cities are redesigned, communities are broken apart to accommodate speed. Soon, the person who wants to walk or bike or simply stay put is marginalized. The car now dictates what life should be. Likewise, school tells us where, when, and how we must learn, making natural curiosity seem inadequate.
Isn't this just progress? I mean, what is so bad about development, about moving forward?
What's bad is not the machine, but the loss of limits. When we forget the difference between having the power to do something and being compelled to do it in one specific way, we lose freedom. So what does a better life look like? It is one grounded in conviviality. That means people use tools they can understand, repair, and modify with others. Tools that foster interdependence, not dependency. A convivial society limits scale. It favors the personal, the local, the slow. It values craftsmanship over productivity, conversation over efficiency. Now you ask how we can live well with technology. The answer lies in discernment. Not every tool is a Trojan horse, but we must constantly ask, does this device enhance my autonomy? Does it deepen my relationships? Or does it centralize control, make me passive, dull my senses? You don't have to become a hermit, but you must resist becoming a node in a system whose goals are not your own. Live deliberately. Choose fewer tools, but use them more consciously. Favor those that allow for shared learning, for community decision-making, for graceful failure. In short, embrace enoughness, seek the joy of limits, and always, always remember, technology is not destiny, it is a choice.
How can we stop technology from deciding things for us? As you say, the momentum they carry often escapes our control.
Yes, that is the essential difficulty. Once a technology embeds itself in daily life, it begins to define what is possible, what is normal, what is even thinkable. And by the time we notice, we are already inside its logic. To stop technology from deciding for us, we must do something unnatural in modern society. We must become conscious of what we take for granted. First, we must learn to say no. That's not easy. Progress is seductive. But refusing a technology, whether it's a surveillance device, a medical intervention, or a smart assistant, requires the courage to seem irrational, even backward. It takes practice. You must train yourself to ask, what does this technology demand of me, of my habits, of my community? Not just what it offers. Second, we must reclaim the power to shape tools rather than be shaped by them. That means favoring technologies that are transparent, you can see how they work, and scalable. They don't require massive systems to function. A shovel is convivial. A nuclear power plant is not. The former invites participation. The latter demands obedience to experts. Third, and perhaps most importantly, we need limits: political, moral, spiritual. In traditional societies, taboos and rituals set boundaries. Modern societies remove those and replace them with technical fixes. We need to recover the idea that just because something can be done doesn't mean it should be. This is not a matter of becoming Luddites. The Luddites were not anti-technology. They were against technologies that stole their autonomy. That is wisdom we've lost. We must gather again in small, intentional communities, not to hide from the world, but to see it more clearly, to test tools before they scale, to hold public conversations about what technologies serve life and which ones distort it. Without this, yes, momentum will carry us, but momentum is not fate. The good life begins when we stop being dazzled and begin choosing again.
You've also thought about the effects of technology and industrialization on gender roles. Can you say something about this, particularly about masculinity?
Yes, this is a painful and subtle thread. How industrialization and technological society distort not only our institutions, but our very ways of being. including how we inhabit our bodies, our relationships, and our genders. Much has been said about how women were alienated from traditional roles, midwifery, food preparation, healing, teaching, by professionalization and institutional takeover. And rightly so, but masculinity too has been profoundly deformed by the same forces. In pre-industrial societies, masculine identity was often forged through relational competence, the ability to take responsibility, to serve one's community through skills, through stewardship, through presence. The father, the elder, the craftsman, the grower. These were roles of care and making. They were rooted in place, in limits, in example. But modernity redefined manhood. It tied it to performance within systems, especially military, industrial, and bureaucratic systems. A man became someone who functions, who controls, who produces outcomes. Success meant detachment, competition, upward mobility, dominance over uncertainty. It meant leaving the home, both literally and symbolically. And that is the wound. Modern masculinity became a kind of exile. Men were displaced from the rhythms of nature, from intergenerational bonds, from the intimacy of craftsmanship, from embodied care. They were seduced by roles that promised power but delivered isolation. Technology amplifies this exile. The more we surround ourselves with machines that flatten emotion, speed up life, and standardize our interactions, the more we lose access to a masculine identity rooted in vulnerability, attentiveness, and rootedness. We're left with caricatures of aggression or passivity or performative competence. And so, I believe we must rediscover a masculine path that is contemplative, not controlling, one that honors slowness, protection of the weak, fidelity to place, to silence. A man's strength must no longer be measured by what he masters, but by what he serves, and how lightly he walks while doing so. Technology must not mediate masculinity. It must be filtered through it, through a character formed not by devices, but by limits, relationships, and rituals that bind a man to the real. This recovery is not nostalgic, it is radical. Because only when men stop performing roles designed by systems can they begin to be present again. And in presence, there is healing. Shall we speak about how this rerouting of masculinity might happen through practices, education, or rites of passage?
That sounds good.
Then let us speak of rerouting, not as a program or a curriculum, but as a return to soil, metaphorically and literally. Masculinity, if it is to be healed, must pass through the humbling experience of belonging again. And that begins in practice, not theory. One practice is manual labor with meaning. I do not mean industrial work, labor designed for productivity, but craftsmanship, tasks where hand, eye, and judgment work together. Woodworking, farming, building a shelter, repairing tools. These teach patience, proportion, failure. A man who knows how to shape something with care begins to recover a kind of quiet dignity, a sense that he is not just a consumer but a steward. Another is rites of passage. Modern society offers none, except perhaps military service or corporate initiation. But ancient societies knew that a boy must be separated from comfort and performance in order to encounter himself. This often involved solitude in nature, fasting, the presence of older men who did not teach answers, but embodied how to hold questions. Such rites were not about toughness. They were about vulnerability, fear, death, renewal, and they were collective. We need spaces again where boys can meet silence, failure, and awe, not alone, not medicated, not explained away, but held. Third, there must be intergenerational companionship, not mentorship in the modern sense, not performance coaching, but deep friendship across age. Masculinity is not passed through information, but through presence. A young man, watching how an elder weeps, how he listens, how he restrains power. This is transmission. It can't be digitized. It can't be rushed. And finally, men must return to place. That means becoming of somewhere again, knowing the seasons, the animals, the neighbors, the stories of the land. A man with no sense of place is like a tree with shallow roots, easily blown over, easily uprooted by machines. This is a quiet revolution. It will not be televised because it happens in forests, workshops, gardens, and small rooms where one man tells another, "You do not need to perform anymore. You are already enough."
I have to say, it does all sound very conservative. Man must return to some idealized scenario, untainted by the corruption he finds everywhere around him. Isn't man also a very adaptable animal, who uses whatever he encounters in the environment to be better equipped for the twin assignments of survival and procreation? Of course, there are drawbacks to any course he may take, alienation in your reading, but surely there are many advantages also.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly the challenge. It does sound conservative and perhaps even nostalgic. This idea of returning to the land, to ritual, to craft. But I never meant to idealize the past or romanticize suffering. I only wish to name what we have lost and to warn that progress, when unexamined, can disfigure our inner life. You are correct. Man is an adaptable animal, brilliantly so. That is one of his greatest gifts. He shapes his tools, and in turn, they shape him. He survives not just by brute force, but by intelligence, imagination, and cooperation. He doesn't merely submit to environment. He reshapes it to serve life. There is nobility in this. And yes, many of the fruits of modernity are real. Antibiotics, global dialogue, the end of many ancient cruelties. Even the alienation I speak of sometimes masks liberation from traditional roles that were suffocating or unjust. A man is no longer tied to his father's tools or his tribe's myth. That can be freeing. But adaptability has a cost when it becomes accommodation without reflection. Just because man can survive in the machine does not mean the machine serves his full humanity. To adapt is not always to thrive. A rat in a maze adapts. So does a prisoner. So does a worker on an assembly line. My concern is not that man invents. It is that he forgets why. He forgets to ask whether his adaptations still serve the deeper tasks of life. To live in truth, to care for others, to suffer with meaning, to prepare for death. So yes, I acknowledge the advantages of technological adaptation. But I also believe we must remain faithful to an idea older than technology, that man is not only a problem solver, but a meaning seeker. That he does not only want to live longer, but to live well. The call to return is not a call to rewind history. It is a call to remember, to bring forward into this moment the elements of life that nourish our wholeness, and to let go of what estranges us, no matter how efficient or dazzling. So perhaps not conservative, but conservative of soul.
It sounds as if there is an unspoken spiritual dimension woven through your prescription. Man often does not realize what he has lost, but he should. As if there is some saving grace inherent in the realization.
Yes, beautifully said. There is a spiritual dimension running through everything I say, though I rarely named it in religious terms. Not because I rejected religion, but because I believed that what is most sacred today often hides beneath the language of the technical, the rational, the institutional. When I say man should realize what he has lost, I do not mean he should return to superstition or submit to dogma. I mean that remembrance, the act of realizing what has been taken, traded, or quietly abandoned, is itself an awakening. It is not nostalgia. It is a moral and existential clarity. This realization is a kind of grace, not because it makes us happier or more productive, but because it can reorient us. It can reintroduce humility, attention, and presence into lives shaped by distraction and speed. The spiritual dimension I speak of is not abstract. It lives in how we eat, how we listen, how we bury our dead, how we care for a neighbor without asking what we gain. It appears when we pause before a screen, before a purchase, before a new machine, and ask not, does this work? But what does this do to me, to us? The tragedy of modern life is not only that we have lost older forms of life, it is that we have lost the capacity to feel the loss. And so, we don't even know what questions to ask. But when someone begins to feel it, not just intellectually, but viscerally, they begin to see differently. A kind of veil is lifted. They see that so much of what we call normal is built on silent assumptions. That faster is better, that more is good, that suffering is a failure, that death must be denied. When that veil lifts, even for a moment, there is pain, but also possibility. And that is where spirit enters, not as doctrine, but as a longing for wholeness, for truth, to inhabit the world more fully.
I like that, inhabiting the world more fully. Can you say more about this, especially when it concerns rerouting as men?
Yes, I'd be honored to. To inhabit the world more fully, especially as men, is not about asserting control or reclaiming some imagined past power. It's about returning to the body, to place, and to presence. Three things modern life systematically weakens in us. And it's about becoming trustworthy again, to oneself, to others, and to the world. Rerouting as men means beginning not with grand gestures, but with the simplest form of attention, being where you are. When you work with your hands, don't outsource the task. When you speak with another, don't manage the conversation. When you feel something, rage, sorrow, shame, don't rush to fix it or flee it. Stay. Let it teach you something. This is the first form of rerouting, embodied attention. We've been trained to live in abstraction, to perform, to plan, to optimize. But masculinity, in its deep and grounded form, begins in the ability to hold presence without needing to act. That kind of presence nourishes others. It stabilizes a household, a friendship, a child. Second, rerouting means finding the ground beneath your feet, literally and symbolically. Most men today are culturally nomadic. They belong to systems, not to places. But you cannot form character in a vacuum. You need weather. You need neighbors you cannot escape. You need a landscape that reveals your smallness and your responsibility. So start where you are. Know the names of the trees. Learn your water source. Volunteer with someone who works with soil or waste or food. Not because it's trendy, but because place makes a man answerable. It limits his illusions, and that is good. Third, rerouting means eldership in the truest sense. It doesn't mean having power over others. It means being available to others without needing to be right. If you are a young man, seek out older men who live simply and with depth, not just those who've succeeded. If you are older, give your attention to those who haven't asked for it, but who need it. Don't advise them, walk with them. And finally, rerouting means accepting the sacred, not necessarily in religious terms, but in the form of reverence. Reverence for life, for mystery, for death. This might mean practicing a silence each day. It might mean singing or praying or sitting under the sky until something inside you loosens. It might mean grieving fully. A man who grieves well becomes more fully human, and from that fullness, he can offer something the world rarely asks for, but deeply needs: grounded gentleness, quiet strength, decisive tenderness. That is what I mean by inhabiting the world more fully, as a man not consumed by the need to prove himself, but committed to being himself here and now.
So how would someone make this concrete in his life?
Yes, let's bring this down to earth. If a man wishes to begin rerouting, to live in the way we've spoken about, not abstractly but concretely, then the first step is not to change everything at once. It's to create a rhythm, a structure of attention within the life he already lives. A man's soul, like a tree, needs a daily environment that feeds it, not just bursts of inspiration. Here is how that might begin, simply and honestly. 1. Establish a morning presence ritual. Before reaching for a screen, before plunging into tasks, sit 5 minutes. Breathe. Look out the window. Light a candle. Speak a quiet word of intention. I am here. This doesn't need to be spiritual in the traditional sense. It's about returning to yourself before the world pulls you away. Over time, this small act becomes an anchor. Second, engage your body in something useful and hands-on. This might mean cooking with care, chopping wood, fixing something that's broken instead of replacing it. Even sweeping a floor with intention can be a sacred act. The point is not the task itself, but the way you meet it. With attention and without rush. Physical acts, done regularly, reteach the mind to inhabit the present. Third, commit to one real conversation a week. Reach out to a friend, a relative, or an elder. Meet face to face if possible. No agenda, no performance. Just time to speak about what matters. Most men are starved for this kind of intimacy and don't know it until it returns. The presence of another honest man can dislodge years of isolation. 4. Spend time outside and stay longer than is comfortable. Not just walking from car to office, but sitting on the ground, walking without headphones, being quiet. Let the natural world recalibrate your nervous system. Let it remind you that you are not only a mind with goals, you are a creature with limits. 5. Create one act of service that's regular and invisible. Help someone without telling them. Clean a neglected space. Pay attention to the needs around you and respond without needing recognition. This builds quiet strength. It roots you in others, without ego. 6. Read something that slows you down. Not news, not commentary, but a book of poetry, scripture, or ancient wisdom. Read one page. Sit with it. Let it disrupt the pace of modern thought. 7. Mark the transitions of the day. End your day deliberately. Step outside. Wash your hands. Light another candle. Say, the day is done. These small rituals aren't magical. They're humanizing. They remind you that you are not a machine meant to keep running. This is not a program. It's a posture. And once it becomes familiar, it grows. You will notice you speak differently. You listen more. You rush less. And from that stillness, you may feel something stir that you haven't known in years. A deep sense that you belong to your life. That is rerouting. That is masculinity made whole again. Not by going backward, but by going deeper.
Mr. Illich, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us today.
And I thank you. It's been a rare gift to speak at this depth, across time and assumption, with someone willing to listen not just for agreement, but for understanding. If anything I've said lingers, unsettles, or stirs a new question, that is enough. Take care, and may you walk your days with attention and courage.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Undead Sages podcast. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your friends, rate the episode, leave a comment, and subscribe to the podcast.